Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. It is the book launch for Black Ice. Patrick has our autographed copies at the bookstore, which Brad very kindly signed for us at home. Look at that, isn't that awesome? And we still have some left. So Patrick, are you going to put the buy link into the comments field?
Yeah, I'll put the link in the comments field, and I'll also be kind of standing by and watching the comments. So if you have questions for Brad, go ahead and put them in, and I'll reemerge at some point to ask any of your questions.
That'll be great. So Brad, I'm going to drink a toast to you, and I'm going to make a comment about wine in Norway.
Okay.
Which is, on the last trip that I've made to Norway, because I have made several, was a train trip. What I discovered was that Norway imports all its wine from France. It's too hard from California and from Chile and whatever due to the expense. So Norway is the only place where I was able to drink Sancerre every single meal. Well, night, maybe not for breakfast. Anyway, I got some Sancerre so that I could toast that on the occasion, I might add, of his 20th Scott Harvath novel. 21st book, but 20th Scott Harvath. Do you want to remind everybody which one is not the Scott Harvath?
So I've written 21 novels in total and 20 in this series. And before I reveal what the 21st one was, I always tell people, Barbara, that my books are like the James Bond movies. You can go into the theater and see the latest James Bond movie without having ever seen any of the other ones, and you'll be fine. So same thing with my books. If you've never read a Brad Thor book before, you can start with Black Ice. If you want to be a purist and order from Barbara, The Lions of Lucerne, you can do that. That's and work your way up to Black Ice. But if you want to start tonight with Black Ice, you can jump right in. The 21st novel, the year that I did my Scott Harvath thriller, Foreign Influence, I also did a standalone thriller about an all-female Delta Force team called the Athena Project.
Right. So, I should point out, because this comes up all the time and people ask, that the publisher very helpfully publishes a list of all of the books in the book. And you can read it, in Brad's case, you read it from the top down. So there are other places where you can figure out the order of the books, but the easiest way is to buy Black Ice, and then you can read from the top down. So now that we've established the Sancerre and all this, we have, just to set the mood, because much of this book takes place in Arctic regions, and particularly in Norway, for reasons that will become clear. I have 3 or 4 photos that I've asked Patrick to show, just to sort of show you what Oslo looks like. And they're either referenced in Near Dark or in Black Ice. So Patrick, do you want to show us the fortress, the famous Oslo fortress? There it is. There I am, actually, in the ice. Anyway, it stands up at the edge of the fjord. It's an old and very famous fortress. And what it also has in it is a really outstanding museum of Norway's resistance in World War II. And it's a very large park-like kind of a complex. But you can see that it was easily defended. So what's the next picture, Patrick? There. So this is kind of a view of the fortress with buildings all around it. And it's a must-see thing to do when you're in Oslo, should you happen to go there. Then we have, I think, a view of, the harbor. I have no idea what that is out there. It appears to be some sort of work of art. Yeah, it's great. And then our final picture is of the famous opera house in Norway. And the way this is built, as you can see, people can actually walk up the sides of it and walk on the roof. It has a wonderful restaurant inside and fabulous acoustics. And it's at the head of the fjord, because Oslo is at the head of a very large fjord. And in point of fact, Brad, why don't you tell us where it is that Scott is living during his summer in Oslo, which is where this book opens.
So Scott is living about 20 minutes by boat from the opera house, and Harvath has rented a little cottage on that very same fjord. And on the work nights that Solvi, during the week, it's easy for his girlfriend to get to the Norwegian intelligence service by car from her apartment in Oslo. So he's been staying in the city with her during the week. And on the weekends, they go out to his cottage on the fjord. And sometimes she'll spend Sunday night there. And then he'll actually take her into the dock by the opera house via the boat he has and drop her off there. And she'll catch a cab for work, which is kind of neat. So that's been Scott Harvath's summer, has been on that very fjord.
I love it. So when you open this book, actually, we are not in Oslo. We are perilously in a helicopter on our way somewhere. Now, it's a really scary scene. Why did you decide to do that to us? Because it's such a cliffhanger at the end of it, all the way through the book. We're all biting our nails going, wait, is it going to drop into the ocean?
That's why. It's really weird. With each book that I write, I try to raise the bar. We've talked about this before in our events together, Barbara, kicking off books. I want to make the books better. And sometimes it's just little twists of the screwdriver here and there. And I'm making micro changes that maybe the reader doesn't even notice, but I notice. And with this, I wanted to do something different. And during the quarantine, I read a ton of books. And I also binged a ton of great TV, episodic television that was really well written. And I think that kind of got into my bones a little bit, this idea of starting with a scene and then not paying it off completely, but flashing back, a week, or in my case with Black Ice, 72 hours earlier. So I wrote this scene, envisioning it as a little piece of the climax. And I put clues in there. There are some things Harvath is carrying on him. And I just wrote them because they sounded really cool. And then I realized I had painted myself into the ultimate corner, because by the time I finished the book, I would have to catch up with that scene in the helicopter and explain why he's carrying the things that he's thinking, the things that he's thinking. And what was really funny is when my editor was editing the book, and I think she must have put it down and picked it back up, like doing something with her kids or whatever, but we caught up to the scene with the helicopter. So you have the little slice in the prelude, the little 1.5 page prelude at the beginning of the book with all the action. And then you have to catch back up to that moment, because I flashed back 72 hours. And she made a note in the margin saying, gosh, I feel like I've heard this someplace before. I'm like, yeah, that was the opening of the book. And she went, oh, of course. So that was something I'd never done before. And that was kind of fun, but it was also really difficult, because it was like that sword of Damocles that was hanging over my head the whole time by the horse's hair. That was I believe it was a horse's hair in the sword of Damocles. I hope it wasn't a human hair. But anyway, I just knew that if I wasn't careful, this sword was going to fall and chop my head off if I didn't perfectly catch up and address that point. So it was a lot of fun to do it. And I think it was a neat action opener, because that's how I like to open the books, is start with action on page 1.
Well, you certainly get our attention in a heck of a hurry. And then you sort of flash to somewhat of a domestic scene in Oslo, which we've just talked about. But one of the reasons this book is so fabulous, I think, is it's a wake-up call to America's strategy, or lack of strategy, and lack of paying attention to the Arctic. And Brad puts in a very interesting statement from the Department of the Navy called "A Blue Arctic, a Strategic Blueprint from the Arctic." And it goes, in the decades ahead, rapidly melting sea ice and increasingly navigable Arctic waterways, a blue Arctic, will create new challenges and opportunities off our northern shores. Without sustained American naval presence and partnerships in the Arctic region, peace and prosperity will be increasingly challenged by Russia and China, whose interests and values differ dramatically from ours. And this book, I'd really like to think that people who are actually responsible for those kinds of things will read it. And I could also add, Brad, that this is true in Antarctica. I mean, you're up in Norway and in the Arctic, but a similar situation is going on in Antarctica, because in theory, both of the polar regions, although mostly Antarctica, are not owned by any particular nation. But of course, in the Arctic, we have a lot of countries coming together. We have Russia, we have Norway, Finland,
Denmark. Yeah, so we have 8 member states, 8 Arctic states that make up the Arctic Council. They are the ones who have sovereign territory that encircle the Arctic. What's interesting about this book, and what partially inspired it, was several years ago, I call it the Seinfeld of diplomatic statements, because it meant absolutely nothing. The Chinese came out and declared themselves a near Arctic state. It means nothing. China's nearest settlement is over 800 miles away from the Arctic Circle. In fact, when former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had that raised in a press conference, he literally guffawed because he thinks it's a silly statement. It doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't. And you are exactly right about Antarctica. And I raised that in the book because the Chinese have been breaking all the rules and regulations down in the southern hemisphere that they're starting to do up in the Arctic. So this is really, as I say in the book, it really is the next Cold War, no pun intended, because of the temperatures. But China and what they're doing up there, hand in glove with the Russians, is very, very serious. The Russians actually had one of their submarines plant a flag in the seabed at the North Pole because they're trying to lay claim to that entire territory and tell everybody that it belongs to them. They haven't been able to prove it. It's kind of a nothing statement like the Chinese near Arctic state. But this is really where the next power competition is not going to happen. It is happening now.
It's absolutely happening now, and shipping routes, forever. I mean, there's a reason why we have the Suez Canal and so forth when you're trying to bring shipping from Asia around to Europe, whatever. But up until recently, you couldn't sail over the top of Russia. Now, I have been as far up in this book. I have been up past Svalbard, all into Longyearbyen, and then all the way to Murmansk, which I have to tell you was not one of my personal favorite stops. It's on the top of Russia, and it was almost 100 degrees the day we were there. So if anybody thinks climate change is not real, they should go to Murmansk. But anyway, they are looking at shipping lanes that now go across the top of Russia, and China can ship going that way to Europe instead of coming down and going through the Indian Ocean or going up through Suez in the Mediterranean or going around Africa. They can now go up north and ship all the way across Russia and come down easily into Europe, and particularly Northern Europe. So, it isn't just military strategy, it's commercial strategy that is greatly at stake here.
Exactly. So the temperatures in the Arctic are rising twice as fast as anywhere else on the planet. So the ice is melting, which exposes great mineral, natural gas, and oil deposits that are worth billions and billions of dollars. But you're right about the Northern Sea route over Russia. That is becoming slush and staying slush longer and longer each year. And so for the Chinese to go from Shanghai to Rotterdam, right, over Russia, that shaves 20 days off of a 48-day journey if they have to go the other way. And the other thing the Chinese love about this is that they avoid the Straits of Malacca, which are heavily patrolled and protected by the US Navy. So the Chinese are looking for ways to move without having to encounter the United States, whether it's commercial goods or if China got Russia to agree to allow them to move their naval vessels, the PLA Navy, over the top of Russia, they could come down on the eastern seaboard and position themselves off that side of the United States. So there's a lot of reasons for the Chinese to be interested in this area. So it's not just military, it's also economic, but they are trying to buy up. What's very interesting, they tried to buy a Canadian gold mining company that was in the Arctic, and Canada said no. They used a Chinese businessman to try to buy all this land in Norway, and the Norwegians said no, and the Norwegian government bought it because China believes if they can get a toehold in the Arctic, they can claim status as a stakeholder, and they want a seat at the table. They want to be able to have some sort of a claim to the vast, not only shipping lanes, but also the vast resources that are up in that area.
And one of the things we've certainly learned in the last year and a half with COVID is how our supply chains have lengthened, stretched. And honestly, Brad, I ordered something, I can't remember what it was. It might have been a pair of tennis shoes or something. But anyway, I ordered something off probably an Instagram account, and I didn't give it any more thought. It wasn't very expensive, and there it was. And not too long ago, before I came here to Santa Fe, where I am doing this event, I got an email, and it said, it was a shipping notification, and it said, your order, blah, 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 has now reached the port of Shanghai. And I thought, okay. What am I supposed to do about that? But I mean, I thought, okay, Shanghai, Oregon, Shanghai, China. And I think we've realized how dangerous it is in lots of ways that we have let our supplies of so many crucial goods, become global. And now we're paying for paying the price. Everybody was looking at the cheapest possible place.
Absolutely. So whether it's PPE that we had shortages of during the initial throes of the pandemic, where a lot of that was sourced out of China, cholesterol medication, any kind of medication. It's amazing how dependent we are on China for our critical medicines. In the interest of a profit and of saving money, we have offshored so much stuff. I think that's one of the big realizations, is that manufacturing is a part of national security. So if you allow another country, if you allow yourself to become dependent on another country for critical supplies, well, that influences your national security. So the thing about China and Russia all getting in bed together, the two of them getting into bed together and pushing so hard in the Arctic. In fact, Russia has opened over 50 old Soviet military installations throughout the Arctic from the Cold War. I mean, Russia's really taking a position up there. So this was kind of fun for me to use this as the backdrop for a big spy thriller, because a lot of people aren't aware that this big power dynamic is happening up there. And China is sneaking in soldiers, saying that they're scientists. So there's this archipelago that's halfway between Norway and the North Pole. One of the main islands, as you know, is Svalbard, and part of the story plays out on Svalbard. But the Chinese have a research station there called the Yellow River Station. And there's been speculation as to, is it all legit science, or are they doing what they're doing in the Southern Hemisphere, which is using it for military purposes and military experiments. And just as a thriller writer, it was irresistible for me. Plus, I'm Scandinavian, so I love Norway. Norway's a NATO partner, and Norway has a border with Russia. I think Norway is really on the cutting edge of a lot of things happening with Putin and with Russia. So I love to write about this area and to wrap the real life stuff in my fiction.
It's a fascinating country. And let's remember, it's a very rich country because of the North Sea oil. And, and it's also a country that has a remarkable safety net for its citizens because it has so much money. They pay, like the Danish, they pay very high tax rate, but they really look after their citizens. So they may not be as subject to economic temptation and pressure as a poorer nation.
Except there is one economic pressure that they fell under that I cover in the book, which is when the Nobel Committee awarded the Peace Prize to a jailed Chinese dissident. So that was the Norwegian side of it. I know a lot of people think of Sweden when they think of the Nobel and everything, but Norway's got a role in this as well. And Beijing lost its mind about 11 years ago when they awarded this prize to a jailed Chinese dissident. And Beijing, as I say in the book, the Chinese have as many types of statecraft as the Eskimo have words for snow. And so Beijing launched in real life a campaign of what's called coercive diplomacy against Norway. They wouldn't let any Chinese citizens go to Norway for tourism, and that was a huge source of revenue for Norway. And they also stopped importing salmon from Norway, which really harmed the Norwegian fishing industry. But Norway didn't buckle. They didn't rescind the award. They refused to back down. The Norwegians are really, really tough. When they believe in something, they stick to it and they will not buckle to pressure. And it took them a decade of all this behind the scenes diplomacy to finally start normalizing things with China. And I incorporated that into the book. How shy might Norway be about countering a potential threat from China if they're just finally starting to get things back to normal? Would they be a little gun shy? Would they want more proof? Would it be tough for Harvath to prove to them that something was going on? You got to trust me. Trust you. You're not even a Norwegian. You're an American. You're just sleeping with a Norwegian. That doesn't get you any cred in our book. So that all of this real life stuff is what I love to pepper into the books, because you know me, Barbara, my number one goal is to entertain people. I want them to have a great white knuckle thrill ride. But if you close one of my novels and you're a little bit smarter, you know a little bit about a different corner of the world or some geopolitical issue that's out there, if you get that just kind of by osmosis from enjoying the book, then that's the icing on the cake for me.
Well, it's the icing on the cake for the reader too. So I have a long-standing theory that people who read crime fiction, thrillers, and other genres within crime fiction like learning things. I mean, one of the joys of reading these books is that without plowing through a lot of fairly dry, for example, exposition and nonfiction. You learn stuff. And I think Black Ice is one of Brad's very most powerful and illuminating stories. And not only does it entertain you, but you're going to come away with an awareness of events in the world, geography and so forth that you would have missed. So, I mean, I've been there several times, and even so, I learned a lot from reading this book, like the Chinese research station, for example. So let's talk about Scott, because Salty, for people who, I'm trying to think, was it Near Dark that we first meet the Norwegian ninja?
Yeah, last year. Yep.
Yeah. So Scott, due to some personal tragedy, is alone, and he meets Sylvie in Near Dark. They are working together, but at the end of it, they come away with a personal relationship. Sorry, that's a spoiler for Near Dark, but too bad, because they're right there at the opening of this book. And so she works for the Norwegian Security Service, and that gives him a foothold. But I love the way you get him into this story. Why don't you tell us how you do it? Because it's the surfacing of the past that really gets it going.
Yeah, so I love Barbara. This term resonated for all of you watching with Barbara last year. And she said she loves Solvi and loved that Harvath refers to her as the Norwegian ninja. She creeps up on him a couple of times and he doesn't see her coming. She's very quiet. I wanted to create a female character to work with Harvath who was better than Harvath. And so her pedigree is she comes from Norway in real life, has an all-female special operations team. That's legit and they exist. And she comes from there and doesn't get enough action. Very similar to Harvath in some of his past, where he moved to a different SEAL team because he wanted more action. And she eventually is disappointed with the fact that when she goes to Afghanistan, it's all about sitting down and chatting with Afghan women. It's not about kicking indoors and shooting bad guys the way she had trained and what she wanted to do. So she ends up going over to the intelligence side of things. She and Harvath have a great relationship, and the book opens with Harvath in Oslo. It's basically this time of year in Oslo. It's July, and Harvath is out of sick days, out of vacation days, and he's told by Gary Lawler, you either be back at your desk on Monday or submit your resignation. And Harvath, being Harvath, he loves Solvi. He says, I got 5 days. I'm going to make the best of them here, but I need to go back because this job, this is my career. This is my calling to do what I do. There is no American dream without those willing to fight and protect it. So he's not going to give up his career at this point as much as he loves Solvi. So he's trying to make the best of his last 5 days. She's very busy. She's gotten a promotion at the Norwegian Intelligence Service. She's a deputy director. She's having to leave work to come home to her apartment to eat dinner with him and then go back to work. So one afternoon, he's sitting in a cafe by himself in Oslo and finishes his coffee, and he's going to go pick up some stuff for dinner. And out of a taxi cab, half a block up, he sees a man from his past, a ghost, as he refers to him, someone he killed years ago, halfway around the world in another book. Now, you don't have to have read this book, but if you have read it, you're going to enjoy it. There's actually a couple of characters that come back in Black Ice. If you've not read any of my books, don't worry about it. You're going to love it. You won't notice. If you have read the other books, it'll be fun for you. It's a little Easter egg kind of a thing. So now Harvath has got somebody. Harvath had made sure this guy was room temperature before he fled the scene. So it's impossible that this guy's still breathing, but it starts a big chase and a big hunt. And Washington agrees. You can stay, track this down, stay at a distance, figure out what's going on. You don't get to just go grab this guy and put his head in a bucket of water until he tells you what he's doing there, because the Norwegians are very sensitive. And the word has gone out from the Norwegians to the CIA station in Oslo. You are not allowed to surveil any Chinese in Norway. It is hands off. We will not risk our newly repaired relationship with China. So there's kind of handcuffs on Harvath, and Harvath doesn't like that. That's not often how Harvath works. It's, I don't work by any rules. I get the job done. So it's an interesting kind of push-pull that happens in the beginning until they start picking up speed and assembling more and more evidence as to what's happening.
So there's another complication that comes up very early, which we can talk about because it's not a significant spoiler, but here is Harvath wanting to figure out, who is this guy? Why is he there? And the whole bit. And there's a woman, this is really almost out of the, out of the Trump playbook, there is a woman that in the Norwegian government who decides, well, you tell it, because I mean, it's a great thing, because Harvath does something, which is a good thing. And the next
Right.
thing he knows, here's this ghastly woman trying to capitalize on it.
Right, to capitalize on it. So one of the, I'd like to pull back the writer's curtain and talk about just a technique, something in writing, if I can, for a moment, Barbara, about this. So there is a great book about screenwriting by a screenwriter by the name of Sid Field. And the book is called Save the Cat. And it talks about establishing a great moment up front to show that the protagonist is likable. He saves the cat from a tree or from a fire, so on and so forth. And one of the best examples he gives is one of my favorite Al Pacino movies, Sea of Love, where Al Pacino, it's Al Pacino and Ellen Barkin, and there's a serial killer out in New York City. But it opens with Al Pacino as an NYPD detective. And the NYPD was famous for doing these stings to get people who had not shown up for court to come to them, and then they could arrest them for not showing up in court. And what they would do is send these official looking notices on Yankee stationery saying that you'd won special opening day tickets for the Yankees game. And you got to come to the Hilton Grand Ballroom, and they would have it all set up. They'd have ex-Yankee players there serving orange juice and all this kind of stuff and donuts. And so they'd fill all of these ne'er-do-wells into the ballroom and then lock the door and arrest all of them. So they're about to arrest him. Al Pacino had been pouring orange juice, lying that he was this Yankee from years ago. He steps into the hallway to kind of check to make sure they're ready to lock the doors. And here comes this big heavyset guy sweating and huffing and puffing, but he's got his son with him, his little 5-year-old son. And this guy is obviously somebody that should be arrested because he skipped bail or didn't show up for court, whatever it is. And Al Pacino subtly pulls back his coat and shows his badge. And this guy freaks out and looks at his son, looks back at Al Pacino, and Al Pacino kind of winks and says, "Catch you later." And that's the save the cat moment in that. You like Al Pacino because he's going to say, I'm not going to embarrass this guy and do this in front of his child. I'm not going to do that to him, even though he should be busted. So anyway, Harvath is on the trail of this ghost. Something else happens where Harvath is torn between this or that. He's got to do something. And this is what I love about Harvath. I really believe that if we are going to choose American operatives to say and empower them to not play by any rules, we need those operatives to have a really strong moral compass. You can't send a sadist and say, you can break all the rules. You need to put constraints on the sadist, but Harvath is very good morally. So he'll do only that which is necessary to accomplish his mission. It's not gratuitous. So anyway, Harvath falls into a separate situation where he thinks, not even he thinks, he's doing the right thing. But there is a member of the Norwegian parliament who's very mercenary, who's trying to court a particular demographic. And I would actually argue that it's opposite of the Trump demographic. She's very pro-immigration and all this kind of stuff. And she's trying to court votes from this particular group of newly minted citizens in Norway and all this kind of stuff. And Harvath has a little bit of a run-in with a couple of guys who fall into that group. And she's looking to make a name for herself. So she's willing to take anything and spin it. We know there's politicians out there like this that are not good people, that'll burnish their own credentials at the expense of others. And that exists in Norway too. It exists around the world. So this woman is determined to make an example of Harvath. And what it does is Harvath's girlfriend says, "You really stepped in it now. This is a problem," because she's like a dog with a bone. She won't let go of it. And he's like, "What's the worst that can happen?" And Solveig says to Harvath, "You could be banned from ever coming back to Norway." And this is a problem because Harvath has realized with Solveig being so busy in her new job, they're not going to be able to meet up in Bali or in the south of France. The only way he's going to be able to see her once he goes back to DC is to use his time to come over and spend time in Oslo with her. So being banned from Norway is kind of this subtle lower plot line that he's got to wrestle with. But the CIA station chief, Holiday Hayes from Near Dark, just told him, "I'm going to get rid of her. Don't worry. Just focus on your mission." And Harvath, being Harvath, wanting to control everything, he's like, "How are you going to get rid of her?" She's like, "Don't worry about it. I'll get rid of her. I'll fix it." The key is to give her a bigger headline than you. Okay. You're the current big headline now in Oslo. What you just did is on the news. We'll figure out something bigger to give to her. So every time Harvath talks to her during the book, he's like, "Have you fixed it yet? Have you fixed it yet?" She's like, "You just got to trust me. I'm going to do it." So by the end of the book, she fixes it for him.
Well, it's one of those things that you track through the book. Actually, my comment about the Trump playbook was simply anything to get the spotlight, anything for media attention. Wasn't really having anything to do with politics of it, as simply the technique of it.
Controlling the narrative, right? Controlling the headlines, being able
Yeah.
to make news and to take advantage of a headline. So in that respect, that's exactly what this politician was doing.
Yeah, and so there are a lot of things that keep going through your mind as a reader from these very few opening pages. You're worried about the prelude where certain peril where absolute peril is going on. Then you worry about the politician woman, and then you think, who the hell is this guy from China that's supposed to be dead? And so there's a whole lot of through lines in this story, which I think really pull you right through it. And part of the genius of that, Brad, and it really is genius that you did, is that while you're being pulled through all this, you're also learning all this stuff about why we're up there. So let me talk, let's ask you to explain a little bit. There's some technology involved in this story, which I thought you did an excellent job of explaining, which was completely new to me and probably will be new to most of your readers. And that's what I mean when when you can get us to see how this technology is important and how it works. Meantime, we're worried about, the politician banning him from Norway or who the Chinese guy is. There's a lot of structural excellence in this book.
Oh, thank you. I want it to be exciting. And when I do put technology in the books, I want it to be easy. I don't want it to be something where you have to go back and reread. And does that make sense? And all this kind of stuff. It's really funny, Barbara, because you've read the book. I wrote the book, so I know everything. And I want to be very careful about spoilers. But I will say this, and it won't spoil it for our soon-to-be readers who are picking up the book. And by the way, if you're just joining us now, Barbara made a big deal in the beginning that she has signed books. So Barbara shipped all these books to my house in Nashville, and I've got out my favorite Sharpie, and I've signed all these books. So if you're looking for a signed copy of Black Ice, Barbara has them at Poison Pen. What's really
goes on sale tomorrow. Let me also remind people, because I've had a couple of people ask me if their copy hasn't shipped yet, and the answer is no, because we're not supposed to start doing that until tomorrow. This is a preview event.
So what's really funny is I had somebody pop up on Instagram who said he was so excited for the book, and he said, by the way, I live in Norway. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, this is an American guy. And I look at his profile. He's ex-military. He married a Norwegian woman, and he lives on the island of Vardo, all the way up north where the NSA, Norwegian Intelligence Service listening station is, the radar station. And I felt like typing to this guy saying, your friends who read this book is going to think at least one of these characters I don't know you, but they're going to claim that you're a character in this book. So it's kind of funny when art meets real life like that.
Well, it is. And actually, we ship internationally every day. And we've had orders from Norway. We can ship the book to Norway. So if you're watching this from Brad usually signs his emails off to me saying sent from a secure and undisclosed location, which I actually know where it is, but that's not the point. But if you are watching it, and when we did our follow-up to Near Dark, when we did our discussion club, if you remember, Brad, we had readers from all over the world who participated in that. And then remember the man from New Zealand who was worried he couldn't stay up, so he emailed his question to Patrick, just in case, which I love. Anyway, if any of you are watching this who are living overseas, it's not a problem for us to send you a book, but I will warn you that you should ask for the shipping charge first, because unfortunately the shipping rates, which we don't control, are quite high. All right, end of commercial, back to book.
Yeah.
Talk about the technology.
So, and by the way, when Barbara talks about the discussion club, this was Barbara's idea last year. She said she wanted to do this. So we gave people, I don't know what, 4 or 5 months to have read Near Dark, and then we reconvened. So several months after the book had been published, we reconvened and did like a book club, did a virtual book club. And we were able to, we didn't worry about spoilers. If you turn in, hopefully we'll do it again for Black Ice, for this book.
Sure.
And then if you tune in, we don't have to worry about spoilers or anything like that. So in black ice, there's a hunt. Again, Harvath sees this ghost, doesn't know what he's up to. There is a piece of technology that's in play that's partly fact, a lot of fiction, but just mixed up enough to make it interesting, that will give one of America's adversaries a real advantage against the United States. It's a dream come true for an adversary of the U.S. This is something they can't come up with this technology on their own. China has come up with it, and China says, let's make a deal. And that's what's interesting, is if you watch the Chinese in real life, they are looking for soft underbelly all around the world where they can get an advantage and get a foothold in countries. Their Belt and Road Initiative, whether it's putting money into infrastructure in these different countries, or finding something that they need on the military side or the technology side, China is very, very clever, and they're nonstop. And unlike us, they think in 100-year pieces of time versus just kind of what's the next election cycle. So I treat the Chinese, particularly the Chinese intelligence services, with a lot of respect, because I think we should have respect for our adversaries, because if we take them for granted and underestimate them, we do so at our peril. So they get treated with a lot of respect in the book, because they're thinkers at the Ministry of State Security, which I did an interview earlier today, like about 7:30 this morning, and headlines on the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal was all about how the Chinese Ministry of State Security was behind the Microsoft hack. And so this interviewer asked me, he goes, how the heck did you plan to have your book released concurrent with this whole headline about the Chinese intelligence agency that you write about in Black Ice? And I said, well, just that good.
Just be modest.
It's Monday, right? It's just an average Monday for me. Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing about this intelligence from reading the book, I mean, one of the things that was interesting about it for me was that it does end up taking Scott to Svalbard and on the archipelago that Brad is talking about. Now, in case you think that Brad is making this up, Svalbard, actually, you can reach it, as I did, by a cruise ship. I wasn't, hanging in there from a military helicopter or anything. But it has a significant polar bear population. And if you are off your ship and you are touring Svalbard, which is a really interesting place, you're not allowed to go outside very specific limits unless you are with an escort who has a rifle and so forth, because the bears really are a menace. And Brad didn't make that up. This is really true. And it's a fascinating place. Unfortunately for it, again, its lifestyle is changing because of the ice. I really worry about polar bears. I think they are one of the species that is going to have the hardest time surviving because their entire way of life depends upon all of the ice. And as the ice is disappearing, it's really going to be brutal for polar bears. And, they may end up just in zoos like the American buffalo or something. I don't know. But I did think you're seeing on Svalbard. Brad, you haven't actually been there, right?
No, I talked to, if I can't go, and I shouldn't say I was on my way. It's not like I had one foot out the door and a backpack to the airport, but I was planning to go, and then COVID happened, and because of the nature of Svalbard, they can shut it down. The governor of Svalbard can just snap his fingers or her fingers and say, that's it, no more flights, no cruise ships, we are closed. And that's exactly what they did, because they did not want any COVID hitting the archipelago. So they shut it down. So I didn't get to go, but I reached out to a very good buddy of mine, and I said, he works at a think tank in DC, and I said, I've read a bunch of articles about this part of the world written by one of your colleagues, and he's written a lot about Svalbard. Would you be kind enough to introduce us? And he said, oh my gosh, I'd be happy to. So he introduced me, Jim Carafano introduced me to a wonderful guy named Luke Coffey. And Luke, I said, are there anything's off limits? And he said, no. And he goes, in fact, I've got pictures. He goes, and we had a tour guide, and she turned her back, and I may have slipped away and taken some extra photos of the Russian settlement. He goes, whatever you want, I'll take care of you. And so I got all these great photos and all this great insider information, particularly about the Russian mining town. And the Russians have a consulate on Svalbard, which is a matter of national pride for them. It is the northernmost diplomatic outpost in the world. And what's really interesting is when you land on that part of Svalbard, your cell phone service immediately goes to a Russian service. It immediately, the minute you turn your cell phone on, you are now pinging off of Russian towers, and they're grabbing everything they can from your phone. It's fascinating. It's like Bartertown in Mad Max is the way I describe it in the book. It's just dirty, and it's miners, and it's rough, and there's also a rugged beauty that you could probably speak to better than I can, because I've only seen it in pictures, but it's actually a beautiful part of the world.
It's a very beautiful part of the world. And in the winter, they do, it's sort of like Yellowstone in the winter, where people go, and Svalbard is very similar to it. And, again, Brad, the first time that I was up in the Arctic, which was, I think, 1989, you were lucky if your cruise ship could go to Reykjavik, and you wouldn't have even thought about landing in Greenland. The next time I went, there was a very southern outpost in Greenland, Katortak, I think it's called. And that was a really big deal. And now you can actually sail around Greenland. It's that quickly that this change has occurred. And so, there are places like Svalbard that were really out of reach of most people, unless you happen to live there. Or Murmansk, which was a World War II Russian port, but only for those very few months where you could sail in and out of Murmansk.
Right, that it wasn't ice locked. Yeah,
exactly. And all of that has really changed dramatically in a very short time. So, that's one reason I think this book is so fascinating. But I thought Brad did a great job writing about Svalbard. I love the town of Longyearbyen, which I think is just a great name. And, you're up there in the land of the midnight sun, and it really is, the 24-hour light, so forth and so on. So Longyearbyen is a great name. And I hope many of you will have a chance to go there. I've done it also by train. You can go from Stockholm up to Lapland, and then you can cross over into Norway. And one of the little trains that goes there goes to Narvik, which was I think, Brad, the northernmost battle of World War II. The British helped the Norwegians try to defend Narvik and keep the Nazis out of it. And
you brought that up. You talked about that last year.
Yeah.
So that was part of what I looked at this year. And I ended up, because of the strategic port of Kirkenes, I ended up focusing stuff there, because the mayor in real life of this one of the northernmost ports in Norway, he's actually actively courting the Chinese, because he wants the Chinese to invest in his town, build out his port, so that when the Chinese sail over the top of Russia, Kirkenes in Norway can be the first European port they stop at. And it's worth a lot of jobs and all this kind of stuff. But the problem is, if they offload goods there, they need a train system, a robust high-speed train system, to get the stuff down into Europe. And it crosses all of the Laplanders' reindeer fields. And so it's verboten. They won't let them do it. And there's a little bit of a psychological operation that gets discussed in Black Ice about why the Laplanders turn against this railroad, which was kind of fun for me to have Harvath stumble across and have him go, "Ooh, that was actually a genius piece of information warfare to turn the Laplanders against the railroad." It's kind of a fun little.
Really not any different than the pipeline protests that we have seen on this continent with Native Americans. The Laplanders have a whole way of life that is going to be at risk. And it's fun to be up there, because reindeer are like everywhere. It's like Santa Claus without Santa Claus. It's a wonderful part of the world, and it's going to be invaded more than it has ever been used to as climate changes. And since you are going to apparently continue Scott with Solveig, unless you decide that she has to go at one point, he's going to be back in Norway, which leads me to a personal statement here, which is one of the things I said to Brad when I was reading Near Dark about the Norwegian ninja, was that I wondered if maybe it was moving a little too fast for Scott to move on from a different relationship and suddenly be in a relationship with Solveig. And you know what I thought, Brad, reading this book, because I was concerned about that. I realized that if you have a lifestyle like Scott and Solveig, but particularly Scott, where every day could really be your last, that maybe, you forego sort of conventional things, then you grab onto whatever happiness, whatever relationships and so forth, you can, because you really don't know whether you're going to survive very long. And you actually touched upon that subject in this book. So I thought, okay, you paid attention when we talked about it.
I heard you loud and clear. I didn't inherit these ears from my dad and not put them to good use. So no, I heard you loud and clear, and you nailed it. It's almost like kind of being in these raging rapids, and there's somebody and you grab a hold of them. You don't have the luxury of dating for 3 months and taking it to the next level when you're being sent on operations here and you're sent on operations there. You know, I talk a lot about second chances and how rare they are in life in this book, and how if you're blessed enough to get a second chance, don't let it go by. Grab it not with one hand, but with both hands. And that's Harvath's philosophy in this book.
Absolutely. You know, you need to ignore the censorious and go with, you know, what works for you and what works for her, because it isn't just Scott that's at risk. Sylvie, you know, she has a dangerous job as well. And, you know, the only time it would get really complicated is if lots of children involved. But fortunately, you know, as mature adults, we're not dealing with all that. Anyway, I think this is really a very exciting book to read on many levels, and maybe we should call Patrick up to see if we have questions from the audience. So Patrick, come out of the dark. I love it. The near dark, only is the real dark here for Patrick.
I am here. Do you want me to appear or just?
I do. Come
voice
back.
Out of the dark.
Come back. It's weird if you just talk through the poison pen side.
All right. Yeah, there's some good questions. Let's see. Mark asks, is there a country that you would like to set a story that you haven't written about yet?
So it's really interesting. My agent years ago, and she represents Dan Brown as well, the Da Vinci Code author. Dan's a buddy of mine, and she said, "Brad, you're organic, and you know you're very seat of your pants with your writing, and it can be stressful for you to not, you know, to paint yourself into a corner, and you go home not knowing what's going to happen the next day." And she said, "You know, Dan outlines, and maybe I get Dan to show you what he did for Da Vinci Code." So Dan showed me his outline. He was so generous, and I saw it. I got to see what was in Da Vinci Code. Obviously, I read the book, but I got to see, more importantly, what he edited out, and it was fascinating. So I tried to outline a whole book, and I wanted to set it in Greece because I've lived in Greece. I love Greece. I did a short story called The Athens Solution for the International Thriller Writers Anthology, their first one. And so I've always wanted to do Greece, and I outlined this whole book, and it took all the passion out of me for writing the book. Robert Frost was famous for saying, "No joy in the writer, no joy in the reader, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader." I like to have the same feeling writing it that you do reading it, where I don't even know what's going to happen next. So I scrapped that book, but I've always wanted to set one in Greece because I am a true Philhellene and I love all things Greek. It's been one of the things I miss most about COVID and the pandemic, the quarantine and lockdowns and everything, is actually not traveling, particularly to see friends in Greece. So that's a long-winded answer, but Greece would be a place I would love to put Harvath.
And it kind of do that. I mean, it's not that far for Sylvie to, you know, to go to Greece. Even though she were on vacation, or you could actually write a book without Sylvie. You know, she could just be back in Oslo doing something.
Sure, absolutely.
I love that idea. There are not enough books set in Greece, in my opinion. There are very few.
Would you help me with the research, Barbara? I mean, it would be very intense.
I've spent a lot of time in Greece. So I would love to do that.
Yeah, we'd have to go back though. We'd have to go back because you got to get those details right. I wouldn't want to do it from memory. We'd actually have to go and island hop and eat and things like that.
Oh, what a hardship. I know. And you'd have to make a decision, right? You'd have to make a decision whether you want to do the islands or whether you want to do the mainland or whether you want to do both, because it's very complicated. Years ago, we took a cruise from Istanbul on a very small ship. It was like a windjammer. And it went from Istanbul to Athens and back, but it went two completely different routes. So in the process, it managed to go through all of those, you know, those wonderful islands, and each one of them is different. They are, yes, you know, they're Greek, but each one of them is almost, you know, it's like a special culture of its own. For any of you who might have watched the Durrells on Corfu, whatever it was on PBS, Masterpiece Theater. It's a wonderful look at one island and what it was like for people to try to figure out what life was like on Corfu if you weren't native to it and so forth, be great. Did you happen to watch that? If not, I'm recommending it to you.
It is on our list. I had never watched Captain Corelli's Mandolin, which is set on Kefalonia. So we did that with Nick Cage and Penelope Cruz. So, but I know exactly the one. I think the woman has a hotel or something like that. And the one you're talking about, yeah, it is one of the things on our list. We've been trying. Our daughter's leaving for college in a couple of weeks, so we're trying to work through all the stuff that she'll sit and watch with us, so we can just squeeze every last moment out of having her here before she goes.
I think there are 3 seasons of it, so give it a shot because it really is a lot of fun. And Lawrence Durrell, if you ever read the Alexandria Quartet, which is an amazing work, he's the Durrell in the writer. So there's a lot there about the writing life. Anyway, long answer, Patrick. Back to another question.
Well, kind of on a related front, will we see Athena again?
Yes, it's something that I would absolutely love to do. I have had a whole plot sketched out in my mind, and it is just a matter of, can I do 2 books in a year? Because the Harvath book is what I'm contracted for, and I don't want to cut any corners. I don't want to rush the Harvath book. 1 year I did 2 books, and that's the year that I did Foreign Influence and the Athena project. So I know I can do it, and I know I can keep the quality up. But I just have to, I have to have that confidence that if I can get, I guess what it means is I got to sit down and write the Harvath book and get it put to bed and leave myself enough time in the year to write a second one. But I've always wanted to do another Athena, so it will happen at some point.
Kristen has a couple of good questions. One of them is, when you're writing, do you need to move around or have background noise or music? What's your writing desk like, or rituals, things like that?
So I normally prefer to look at a wall. Like I have my computer screen here and it's against a blank wall. Sometimes I will put pictures up of actors or actresses that I think of for the different roles, whether it's the villain or who I'm thinking about at that moment resembles Harvath in my mind and stuff like that. When I do get stuck, I've got a baseball bat in my office, and there's something about swinging the bat that at nothing in particular, just the act of swinging it, that just motion is medicine, as my wife, the sports medicine physician, says. There's something about moving around that you want to change your thoughts, change your position, sort of a thing. So yeah, I get up and move around with a baseball bat to think.
Wow. I don't think I've ever heard that before. Have you, Barbara?
No.
That's really fascinating.
But in a related question, Bran, because this book has so much interesting material in it beyond, the action scenes in Harvath and so forth, would your ability to write a Harvath book more quickly in order to allow for an Athena book depend on how much research you had to do as compared to, because you've written so many books that I'm pretty confident that you could write action scenes and all the rest of it in a fairly short time. And what would slow you down would be all the information and the background and consulting with people and so forth.
Yep, that's very true. So so David Morrell, who lives in Santa Fe, where you are now.
And
David,
we're having lunch tomorrow.
Okay, well, please tell him I said hello. I love David. He's one of the dearest people in the world. David, in his book on writing, which is excellent, and if any of you are aspiring writers or actually active writers and are looking to perfect your craft, I would highly recommend you get the book from Poison Pen. David changed the title. And I want to kill him for changing the title, because it used to be Lessons Learned from a Lifetime of Writing. And he's changed it, and I can't get the new title to stick. So I recommend his book all the time, and I do it by the old title because that's burned into my mind. But David talks about the fact that if you have an idea for a book, it's like rocket fuel, and the idea has to propel you through the entire year of writing the book. So you should not tell anybody what the idea is, but you should definitely make sure that the idea has got enough power to get you through. So that's what I always deal with, is I want to make sure I've got an awesome Harvath idea, and I'm so focused on doing something and having it be in the headlines, have the book beat the headlines, kind of a thing. I look over the horizon, I read the tea leaves and stuff. So that's writing a book quickly, writing a book in a way that it would leave me time to do an Athena project at this point is really, really difficult because I've become such a crass person. I'm editing and changing and tweaking and all this kind of stuff. I'm such a perfectionist that it would necessitate me kind of learning to let go a little bit of it. And I'd worry about, am I not doing everything I can for the readers? Because Barbara, I've said this to you before, I don't work for the publisher. I work for the readers. They are my employers. Without them, I don't have a job. And when they leave me 5 stars or whatever, that's my annual performance review. When they tell somebody, you should read this book, Black Ice by Brad Thor, that's my annual performance review. And it's important to me that my employers are happy. So the idea of writing 2 books in a year is kind of tough at this point, but I hear what's being asked, and I would love to do an Athena project book. It's just a matter of getting that comfort level of doing 2 projects in the span of 12 months.
And the David Morrell book, I looked it up, is called The Successful Novelist, Lessons from a Lifetime of Writing and Publishing.
Okay.
I'm not sure he improved it.
Just tell him, Barbara, when you see him that that we spoke about him lovingly the night before you got together with him.
I will certainly do it. I'm very fond of David. He's a wonderful guy and a wonderful writer and a terrific mentor to all kinds of people.
Absolutely.
Right, Patrick, another question?
And an incredible life story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do have some more questions. George, he asks, what technological development do you think is most concerning for the United States moving forward?
So what technological development? This morning when I woke up, the Russians claimed they had launched a hypersonic missile over the Murmansk, the peninsula right there, from the White Sea over towards the Arctic, Barbara, 220 miles, and hit a target on the other side. So the Russians are claiming that this hypersonic missile can defeat any sort of United States missile defense. I think the Russians are full of it. I don't believe a single thing that comes out of, out of that country. They couldn't even come up with a good COVID vaccine. So the fact that they're claiming hypersonic missile, I don't necessarily believe it, but I do think things in that realm are a big issue that we have to pay attention to, because if that technology does come online, we're going to have a lot of tough things to deal with.
Let's see, Dan asked this question twice. It's just, how do I get a letter to you? I'm assuming you have is there an address on your website or a PO box or?
There is not. I don't get any mail sent to me. They can send it to me courtesy of Emily Bessler Books at Simon & Schuster in New York City, and they take care of getting mail to me. So that's a good way to do it. And by the way, I've got a super fan who said that if I waved to her tonight, she would wave back. So Mary Platt, I remembered your request. Here's my wave to you. So wave back if you're still with us watching. She buys all of her books, Brad Thor books, from you, Barbara, in Poison Pen. And she pre-ordered right away, and I promised her I'd give her a wave tonight. So that's for you, Mary. Thank you for watching and for being a Poison Pen customer.
And thank you from us as well, Mary.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's see here. There are a couple of gun-related questions, firearms. Tim says, I appreciate the attention to detail for the firearms used by Scott Harvath. What are your own personal favorites?
So I've got an H&K VP9, which is new. That's one of the newer ones. I've got a Les Baer Custom 45. I've got a beautiful, by the way, I just did, if you're interested in my firearms, I just did a series of photographs that are going to be appearing, I think, starting tomorrow on the website everydaycarry.com. And I've got some really cool guns that are going to be in there, including my Accuracy X Custom 45, the Norseman. They engraved Scott Harvath's call sign on the slide, which is really neat. I've been a longstanding Glock guy. I mean, I default often to my Glock 19, but I use a Glock 17 mag just to have that little extra capacity in there. Sig Sauer P365 is a lighter, smaller everyday carry or backup. So that's just a handful of the stuff. I could go all night on this stuff. I mean, I love this, and I appreciate that you appreciate the accuracy. That's a great question, because nothing ticks me off more than watching a Hollywood movie where somebody's about to go into a room and that's when they make the weapon hot. No professional walks around without a round in the chamber, or when there's the sign of or the sound of like safeties being flicked on Glocks. There's no safety. So I'm a big stickler on the details. I think it's important.
Let's see. Jonathan asks, what are you reading? Do you have any good nonfiction suggestions at the moment?
So let's see, nonfiction. I'm reading an interesting book by Jonathan Rauch called The Constitution of Knowledge, A Defense of Truth, which is really, really interesting, starting with Socrates and a discussion he had in the streets of Athens, going all the way to today, and why expertise and institutions that sort and support expertise are important. So that's a really good one. Eric Larson's book, The Splendid and the Vile, about the Blitz in London in World War II. I'm the biggest Eric Larson fan you'll ever meet. The great summer read I'm on right now, and it is laugh out loud funny, is Inside Comedy by David Steinberg. It's been a rough 15, 16 months, and I have tears rolling down my face reading David Steinberg's new book, Inside Comedy. It just came out like a week ago. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. Really good stuff.
Inside Comedy. Got to write that down. Take a note of it.
Great book.
Let's see. Jonathan asks, what is the status of the book that you were working on during the pandemic?
So the book that I was working on during the pandemic is Black Ice, published tomorrow. That's the status.
Okay. Let's see. Kristen, what is your favorite men's fashion trend?
Is it Kristen West, or is it just Kristen? Can you see a last name there?
I can.
Is it Kristen? Is it Kristen West?
Should I out her?
You can if it's Kristen West. You bet you can.
It is.
She's awesome. She's awesome. I see Kristen daily on Facebook. Kristen, I love you. What is my favorite men's fashion trend? I'll tell you, the one that I have been so reluctant to adopt is going a little bit higher with the trouser length, so you're showing some ankle. But I see it everywhere now. And I went to my tailor and I said, hey, you know, I've got a pair of these trousers. I want to do this. And he refused. He's like, I don't want to do it. You're going to have to find somebody else to do it, because I don't think you should be wearing it like that. So it's cool. I see it on all the Instagram photos of all the Europeans and stuff like that. But, you know, I'm a big fan of a blue blazer in the summertime. You can't go wrong. And I actually like that I can throw a pair of white tennis shoes in with anything, and that's cool, whether it's a blue blazer or something even a little bit fancier than that. So that's kind of my summer go-to now, is the white tennis shoes.
So is the short trouser look the sockless look as well?
Yes, absolutely.
So
No
really
socks.
it's flashing men's ankles. Do you know that was a big thing? And if you go back and read like Regency romances and stuff, one of the huge turn-ons in there was a woman who, with a long skirt, if she flashed her ankle somehow, like stepping up into her carriage or something, it's a huge turn on for men. So maybe now we've arrived 200 years later at the way to attract women is to flash your ankle. I love that. That's so funny.
I could see Daniel Silva doing that look. Couldn't you, with the I'm just kidding. George McDermott, he says, do you still have your hand grenade cufflinks?
George, I love George. And I got to tell you, George, I promise you, I will get back to Denver. I promise. And you and I will get together. George is an unbelievable fan. Just a go-getter, just a really, really funny guy. And I'm surprised, George, that the fashion question didn't come from you, styling and profiling, George McDermott. So yeah, I still have those. In fact, the person who gave me those, it was his birthday yesterday. He lives in Santa Fe. It's a good buddy of mine who lives in Santa Fe, and he's friends with David Morrell. His name is David Marion, Barbara, and he gave me those hand grenade cufflinks as just kind of a funny gift. But yes, I still have them. I have a nice little box of cufflinks because I like cufflinks, so I have them all in there.
You know, I'm beginning to see shaping up here, Brad, an opportunity to have sort of a ThorCon. When you feel able to come back to Scottsdale, it's not that far from Denver or Santa Fe, and we could do a thing where we could do it almost like a little convention, but we could also add the video element. Because I'm always asked, what are we going to do? Are we going to continue with Zoom when we go back to live events? And the answer is yes, because we've actually done that for years with Preston and Child, because Lincoln Child doesn't travel. So forever, we have done events at the Poison Pen where Doug Preston is live, the Lincoln Child is an image, on a screen or something. And I think we can upgrade our technology so that you and I could be doing this live in front of all your friends and so forth, but we could also be broadcasting it out. I mean, we've done that for years on Facebook so that your wider audience, can be a part of it as well. This technology has really made it possible for all of us to get through this COVID time, connecting with authors and connecting with readers in a way that I wouldn't even have imagined was possible. It came on so fast. And for you doing research, if you can actually talk to somebody on Zoom and they can show you things, that's dramatically different than, just emailing or back in the old days, writing letters or something.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. Yeah, it really is. So we'll talk about that depending on how things go for next year. And for those of you who might like to do a Brad Thor book discussion group again, I think we did it in October, so that you had time from July to read Near Dark, which had some really interesting questions that we were able to address. So we'll look for something maybe in October, depending on Brad's schedule and ours and all, where we could talk about Black Ice. And the deal is that you have to read it before you join, or you have to be prepared to learn more than you wish to. Anything else there, Patrick?
Yeah, there are a couple of good last minute things that have come in. Mark says, okay, so when can we expect a Brad Thor for governor run in Tennessee?
Like Michael McConaughey, you're taking lessons, huh?
Matthew, yeah. Well, if you ask my wife, it'd be tomorrow, because my wife is a doctor and there have been some things going on medically that she's not happy with here in the state. You know what? I'm going to start with dog catcher, to be honest with you. I really believe in having the appropriate knowledge and things like that before you move into a position. So I think that'd be too big of a jump for me. I just signed a new contract with Simon & Schuster for 4 more books. So I would say any political aspirations are at the earliest at least 4 years away. So as an answer to the question, it's not going to be in the next 4 years because I'm doing 4 more books for Simon & Schuster. But thanks for the question.
That's awesome. There are a number of people that are just weighing in saying, thank you for these events. And we really have reached quite a large audience by doing these. And it's great to see them coming back and to all of our events. It's fantastic. I've been pre-ordering my Brad Thor books from the Poison Pen because of these live events. Thank you very much, Mary. We appreciate it.
Well, we want to thank Brad for taking the trouble to sign them, because,
absolutely.
basically what we've done is turn Brad into a shipping clerk, which is really was not his most recent career move that he had in mind. But, it's a whole different thing. It used to be that Brad would come to the store and the books would arrive at the store and the Poison Pen staff would make sure that it all went smoothly. And Brad didn't just sign his name, but it doesn't work that way anymore. He gets truckloads of books that come to his office. Somebody has to unpack them. He has to sign it, pack them back up, ship them off to us and so forth. It's really been a big thing for authors to be kind enough to do that for you fans in order to keep it going until we can go back to the old system or whatever version of the old system we managed to construct. So, I think all of you should really thank Brad for being willing to do a task like that, because it is a big deal.
Well, and I wanted to sign the actual physical books for you. And I wanted people to know that if they bought the books from Poison Pen, that those books had been in my hands. Each book, I'd opened it and I'd signed and shipped them back. So it's my pleasure. Barbara, you have one of my favorite bookstores on the planet, and you've always been so good to me. And I'm so glad that we can continue this. And it's been a special tradition to launch with you the night before the book comes out. And I really appreciate doing this. And I appreciate you making the time while you're on the road to host this. So thank you. And thanks, Patrick. This has just been a lovely, there it is. Black Ice.
There it is, Black Ice. Well, it's really been our pleasure. And, I love the fact that, in point of fact, I'm in Santa Fe. Patrick is at the store in Scottsdale at our new upper level because we've had to expand the store. You're at a secure and undisclosed location, and I'm not ratting you out. And the book is mostly, it's in Norway and other things. And I think, what a really interesting global, thing that we have all constructed. And I'm going to add one more thing too, because I'm an historian and I've often thought about this, is that, the British created an empire in the 19th century that depended upon big supply lines. That's why we had Hong Kong and, Suez and all the rest of it. And they really were instrumental in starting the Industrial Revolution, but then they started moving it out and stuff didn't happen in Britain anymore, and the supply lines got longer and longer, and they did all this. And I think to myself, why can't we read history and figure out that this was a mistake for us to do that? And one of the things I really like about your book is that you point out to us how dangerous it is for us to have basically outsourced manufacturing of so many things, whether it's my shoes that are now in the port of Shanghai and may never leave it, or whether it's, pharmaceuticals or whatever. We're just repeating what the British did. And, it doesn't go well. So I do love the fact that Brad, is entertaining you, but he's also really talking to you about the world as it is and the world that perhaps we ought to be thinking about constructing as we move forward. So I'm hoping that when you said you're signing 4 more books, that you are going to assure us that we're going to have this conversation next July on
Absolutely.
the 21st Scott Harvath, whatever it might happen
Absolutely.
to be, right?
I promise. You got it.
All
We're
right.
good.
And for those of you that we know how to contact, we will let you know, or Brad can let you know about the discussion club that we will do coming up. There'll be a podcast available for this as soon as my husband, who's now got over 100,000 downloads on his podcast channel from our events. And we've done over 500 Zoom events in the last few months too. I know, we actually counted. It will live on our Facebook page. So if you know people who are Brad Thor fans and they weren't able to tune in tonight, or they'd rather download a podcast than sit and watch a video, you can actually put the video on your smart TV and you can knit, while you're watching it. You don't have to sit in front of a computer, but spread the word, because it's a nice thing to do for Brad, who has worked so hard for all of you, his employees. So thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Yeah.
Sorry, employers. Robert, right.
Bosses.
Anyway, thank you very much for joining us, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Night, Brad.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Night.